Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everyone. We are from Group 12, English Education Department. In this occasion, we are proudly present the materials for our study about Malaysian, Chinese, and also Indian accents. Before starting to the materials, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Giska Arini Ritmadanti, and my partners are Elaine, Azakiah, and also Faeliza Jasmine. The first material will be explained by Giska. Do you know what is Manglish? Manglish, or sometimes Maglish or Mangled English, is an English-based Creole spoken in Malaysia. Malaysian English still pretty much English, but mixed with some Malay, Chinese, and Indian words or slang. Malaysian English, or formerly known as Malaysian Standard English, MSE, is a form of English used in Malaysia and is the lingua franca in Malaysia. However, Malaysian English should never be confused with Malaysian colloquial English, which is famously known as Manglish or Street English. Interestingly, many people in Malaysia are fluent in two different forms of English: Malaysian Standard English, close to the English spoken by native speakers worldwide, and Malaysian Colloquial English or Manglish, not understood by foreigners, and are able to switch between them depending on the social situation. In fact, Manglish is widespread throughout all social classes in Malaysia, including bank managers, teachers, and doctors. There are several varieties of Malaysian English. However, educated Malaysian English is a continuum comprised of different levels. The first one is high educated Malaysian English. Next is medial educated Malaysian English and low educated Malaysian English. The first is characteristic of those speakers who are university educated and or near native speakers of English as a first or home language and whose medium of school instruction was English. Medial educated Malaysian English is used by those speakers who are still studying for their first university degree and whose medium of instruction is English to a large extent. Low educated Malaysian English relates to those who have completed their secondary education and whose medium of instruction is Bahasa Malaysia, Mandarin, Cantonese, Tamil, or another local language. To this group, English is studied as a subject at school, which may or may not be used outside of the school confines. The first one is front vowels. These include the vowels of C, sit, egg, and cat. Educated Malaysians produce all these vowels in general. However, their distribution differs considerably from RP. The egg vowel has a mid-low rather than a mid-high variant. The cat vowel is said with a low central rather than a low front vowel. The sit vowel in final position, as in happy, funny, is said with the long vowel of C. The C vowel is sometimes said with that of sin in certain contexts. A doctoral ESL Malay female student has once said, "We seek excellence and quality for our student," where seek was intended, of course. Central vowels. They include the vowels of woman, ago, father, girl, work, cut, and cat. Malaysians vary in their pronunciation of these vowels. The central vowel of ago and father are differently pronounced where it is prolonged and even stressed in the latter case, especially at pause. That is father, teacher. The quality of this vowel may vary between the vowel of egg, a low mid variant, the vowel of cat, a low central variant, or the vowel of girl, a long central variant. The vowel of girl and work is usually reduced in length, so it is not as long as its RP equivalent. In both father and girl, the R is silent, so father and girl. The vowel of cat does not exist in most educated users of Malaysian English, where it is pronounced with the vowel of ago, with the exception of the word mother, which has an RP variant. However, it only takes a little training to enable them to produce it. Finally, cat has a low central rather than a low front vowel. Back vowel. These are the vowels of car, father, on, thought, court, put, and moon. Educated Malaysian English users employ all these vowels. However, two things can be noted here. The first one is length. The vowels of car and court are usually reduced in length. They are not as long as their RP equivalents. So, car and court are more like their general American variants, though with silent R, of course. And incidence. The position of these vowels in the word affect their pronunciation. This is an area beyond the scope of this work, which will be left for future research. Next is diphthongs. One can distinguish the following diphthongs for educated Malaysian English. The first one, those that end with the vowel of sin, which include fine, I, boy, and toy. The vowel of make, say, is lacking in most speakers who replace it with the vowel of egg with added length, just as happened in Scottish English and Northern England speech and elsewhere. Second, those that end with the vowel of put, which includes now and cow. As to the vowel of so and no, it is mostly lacking in educated Malaysian speech, a feature that it shares with many other native varieties of English, as in the above-mentioned ones. Thus, no is pronounced as a long vowel, no, so, which can be described as long, mid-high, rounded, and back vowel. Third, those that terminate with central vowel of ago, which include the vowels of ear, beer, air, hair, and poor, tour, sur. All these vowels are produced with their RP or near RP equivalents. The only difference is that the vowels of ear, poor, and all similar cases have a relatively longer first element, which is sometimes followed by the Y or yes and W of we. Thus, one is likely to hear iya, bia, poa. Of course, R is silent in all such cases. Slow speech delivery is responsible for this manner of pronunciation, it seems. And the last one is triphthongs. Educated Malaysian English has 5 triphthongs in contrast to what Jasmine claims. These are generally the same as their RP counterparts. However, a few remakes are worth noting in this connection. The first one, these triphthongs are pronounced at a slower, more relaxed pace than in RP, in which they tend to be more quickly articulated to such an extent that the second element is dropped. Moreover, the triphthongs of tire, tur, rhyme with the vowel of tar with which they have merged in young RP speakers. The same applies to our and or a. Such merger is not heard in Malaysian English. Second, because of their slower delivery, Malaysian often insert a Y or W between the second and the third element of the triphthong. For example, layer, lia, lower, loa, tower, toa. Third, the triphthongs of sever and lower are lacking and are replaced by a lengthened first vowel. To sum up, educated Malaysian English vowels are obviously British English type, though not necessarily RP type. Thus, their number and quality are more similar to RP than to General American. English is famous for using sentence final particles, little words that get tacked onto the end of a sentence to convey the speaker's attitude towards what was said. They can be a bit tricky at first, but once you've figured them out, they become a major source of color for your speech. For example, say that someone tells you about how good Harry Styles' new album is, and then asks you what you think about it. In English, you might respond, "Good loh," and for the standard English, "Yeah, it's alright. I don't have any particular views about it though." And then, "It's good gua. I don't know much about it, but I guess it's good." And the last one is, "It's good meh." Huh, I don't think it's good at all. So loh means exclaiming that something is obvious, similar to English, duh. And then gua expresses that a speaker doesn't have a particular opinion about the topic at hand, similar to probably. And the last one is meh, expresses that the speaker doubts what someone has just said and probably disagrees with it.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Faeliza Jasmine from 3C class, and in this occasion, I want to explain about the Chinese accent. But first, there are several points that I want to explain in this occasion. And first is introduction, describe about the Chinese accent, and second, the language features of Chinese accent. And the third is conclusion about the Chinese accent. And the first is introduction. For the intelligibility of the Chinese accent is for the purpose of communication. Speakers from all over the world don't need to sound like the native speakers to get themselves understood. But in that case, the intelligibility becomes the most important factor in English pronunciation. And of course, the non-native English speakers' pronunciation just have to be intelligible, not accurate like native speakers. And of course, in this task, here tries to figure out the basic features that make the Chinese accent English hard to understand. And in another word, what hampered the international intelligibility of English speakers in China. Also, I would like to discuss how to improve the pronunciation to enhance the universal intelligibility. Also, the writer on the journal make a conversation with a Chinese people who was trying to speak English. And for the conclusion, the Chinese people got the problems in his pronunciation are both representative and obvious. And next is the language features of Chinese accent. And first, the vowel of Chinese accent. Most of the studies mention about Chinese accent English speakers cannot tell the long and short vowels apart, especially between E, E, and E. This problem can be misleading when sheep and sheep, or leave, or and leave just seem to be the same. Another issue with the letter E is sometimes the Chinese people would pronounce E or E, like A. For instance, Chinese people pronounce is as is, but not as is. Also, like in conversation 18, he mentioned about finish the job. The word finish here was pronounced like finish. I do note that there is some phonetics change in English, and in certain situation, the letter E will be pronounced like A or A. But it is not a common rule in this interview. This kind of pronunciation just seems to be unnecessary. And still in the vowel, the other obvious issue with Chinese speaker is that they couldn't tell the different pronunciation between the letter A and the letter E. In conversation 18, he talked about his job and used the word vessel for many times. Correct pronunciation would be vessel. But in his answer, they spoke it more like vessel. And in the conversation 5, he said he started to learn English when he was 10 years old. The number 10 here was pronounced just like the word han. This problem can be troublesome. The letter A and E are very important and very common. The speaker mixed these two letters together because his English is becoming rustier without the drilling and practicing. Next is for the Chinese vowel. In Chinese phonetic system, there is a vowel O. It sounds just like the mixture of O and O. It can be even more misleading sometimes. When he had the pronunciation between O and O, it was neither a clear diphthong like O, nor had the shape of the mouth when pronouncing the O. Next is Chinese consonant. The Chinese people tend to use W to replace V. In Chinese, there is not an actual labiodental fricative sound like V. Usually it is treated like an allophone for we. In some dialects, this situation appeared a lot in my interview in the writer interview, like studies of Chang 1987 and the Terding 2006 showed is very representative. And also they use we quite frequently in words like have, very, or live. In conversation 18, he used the word vessel couple of times. As we didn't know this term, we put down vessel because their pronunciation. And also it is so funny that in Chinese, people who pronounce that or that are considered with serious pronunciation issues. So normally it is pretty hard for Chinese learners to pronounce these two phonetics naturally. The Chinese people Here I use the to replace they in words such as them and they. And also, even though the Chinese phonetic system is using the Roman letters, the pronunciation can be totally different. Sometimes the old habit of the first language would kick in, and the pronunciation goes wrong. And negative transfer like this can be seen in the pronunciation of consonant clusters such as t. And next is for the Chinese consonant. Chinese students often get confused by the Chinese initial and overpronounce it with a very strong puff of breath. Like the writer speakers talk about China and Chinese all the time, but the pronunciation was just not quite right. It is still understandable, just affected by the speaker's first language too much. Next is for the Chinese syllables. As for the syllable, the most obvious pronunciation issue is that the writer speakers tend to add vowels to the words that finish with the consonants. This issue is another negative transfer from Chinese phonetic rules. Most of the Chinese characters are finished with vowels. Some Chinese accent English speakers just like to read English words like the same way in Chinese. For instance, in the conversation one, the speaker said his first language is Chinese. The word first was pronounced like first. The same situation happened in almost all the words that end with consonant. Like the speak English in conversation 8, speak was said like speaker. Just at a weekend, a, by the end of the word. Next is the Chinese English intonation. Still, sometimes the Chinese speaker's intonation can be confusing. Cannot say that this is a Chinese related negative transfer. It is more like a personal habit needs to be fixed. Also, some negative transfer from the first language can be seen in the intonation. Chinese is with four different tones, and each character is relatively independent to each other. And that makes Chinese sound rising and falling in a particular cadence. This habit of speaking Chinese clearly affects the Chinese accent English speakers. And also they speak English with an incorrect intonation because they try to pronounce every word individually rather than to put them in a sentence. And next is for the conclusion about this task. And also I realized the importance of Chinese accent is the pronunciation. It is hard to achieve the standard like a native speaker, but to be intelligible is not as easy as it seems to be. By listening to the record, both the right speakers and the writer were shocked by the way we spoke. When they were talking to each other, they had no idea that they made so many mistakes in pronunciation. And for me, I care about my pronunciation and I always try to do it accurately. And also, it will take more time to manage this. Now, I just highlight the intelligibility as my priority. And I found that it was a great way to improve the pronunciation by recording something and playing it to check what went wrong. And also, when I was trying to find a pattern of the speaker's pronunciation issues, I can see how I made the same mistakes over and over again. And it is always great to see my reflection in others' fault. And that's all from me. And for the next material will be explained by Elaine. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Elaine Ramadhanty from 6th class. Today I will show you about Indian accent, about Indian English and phonetic and phonology. Table of contents for the first introduction, describe about Indian accent. Result, describe about Indian or phonetic language and how the rhythm intonation. Third, conclusion about the conclusion of Indian accent. According to some research of Indian English, its most striking particularity is phonetics. In Indian English phonetics, a number of deviations from the British English pronunciation standards are observed. Research of Indian English explained these phonetic particularities by the fact that peoples inhabiting India have a different articulation apparatus than peoples inhabiting the British Isles. The characteristic feature of this apparatus is the jaws being looser and the distance between the upper and lower teeth being relatively more comprehensive. So, the oral cavity is more and even much more open than the standard British pronunciation implies. Fazania Angelus 215 Sagal 88. English remains the second language in India as the official language of the Union, as the official and higher education language, and as a language among educated people if they do not share a common Hindi language. The difference between dialect and language often poses a serious challenge, as linking these concepts is usually not an easy task. In the word cake, the first letter K is an aspirant and the second CK is a voice sound. For example, paper, 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 and paper, paper, pipe, pipe, poop, poop, tain, tain, tilt, tilt, thought, thought, hoot, crack, kex, kex, kinetic, kinetic, cook. A similar problem rises in case of parsing. Sound. Most Indian produce the sound as in Hindi letter tha. Mostly northern Indians fix I sound before the words begin with letter S. For example, they pronounce the word school as X, X, instead of SKI, the letter T, and certain words sound as D rather than T. For example, water, water, water is pronounced as what. What do they say about us? Most Indians cannot differentiate the V sound from the F sound. It is done in two ways. Firstly, they produce sounds for them representing the Indian sound F and W, respectively. It is because in Indian language there is no V sound. For example, they pronounce the word fail like will, 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 instead of fail. Secondly, if they try to produce the two sounds like native speakers, they face difficulty in producing and differentiating the sound V from F, and they pronounce V as F. Most of the Indian English speakers cannot recognize the basic difference between them, i.e., the F sound is voiceless, yet the V sound is voiced. Most Indians face the same kind of difficulty while producing S and Z sounds. The S sound is voiceless, whereas Z is voice sound. They pronounce the sound Z as voiceless, like S sound. IE also reveals at times a deletion in relatively light positions. For example, dispensary, allegory, confederation. The WH word are many a time articulated with the WH sequence, as in why, and where, for why and where, respectively. The geminates are also many a times articulated, but within a cross morpheme boundaries in words such as given below. Innate, cannot, fully, oppressive. Rhythm and intonation, i.e., reveal a falling intonation in statements such as in the boy is running on the road. The boy is running on the road. Falling intonation can be perceived in commands and exclamation. Rising intonation is visible in yes no questions, take questions, some WH plus questions, and independent clauses. Yes no question. Are you coming? Are you coming? Take question. He has done the work, hasn't he? WH plus question. What is the financial benefit? And dependent clause. The boy who is playing will come here soon. In the case of compounds, the leftmost primary stress is generally retained as animation, relaxation, Chinese, Japanese, meditative, dramatic, photography. In Indian English, complete intonation divides phrases according to the target orientation of the expression and shows all kinds of psycho-emotional tones. In incantive, intonation is similar to communicating intonation in its sound coloring, but the beginning of an incentive phrase is pronounced in a tone higher than the beginning of a narrative phrase. Most Indian people, when they are using Indian English, they have problem with consonant F and V.